All right, hey, here we are in CSS Units. So we're gonna go over percentage, basically. That's the big thing from this lesson, and we'll talk about some other stuff, and I will intentionally walk you guys through some bugs as we go through this, and hopefully that'll save you time in the future, because you're gonna run into bugs. And so if you can run into them by me running into them in this video, then that'll probably save you some time. Let's get to it. So looking at the challenge, we've got we want to use %units to make the width of main. So if I look down here, we've got the main class. I already gave it a background of lime. And here it is, the div main. And we have another div sidebar. I didn't go add any interesting content here. I just copied some p tags. So you can ignore the content. And they're displayed inline block. They've got some background on each one to differentiate them visually. And what do we want to do? 65% width on main and 35% on sidebar. All right, so let's just do that. By this time, I think you guys are probably fairly familiar with the idea of let's write some properties here. And in this case, the property we want to use is width, 65%. All right, hey, there we go. You'll notice that it's already right off the bat, it's pushed our other sidebar div down on the page. Let's go ahead and do this one. What do we want here? Width 35%. All right, great. So we've got the right widths, and you can see they're not in line up at the top here, and that's why I added a test. It says they should be horizontally aligned. So what's going on? We've got the right widths. Let's go say 34. Hey, so if you take it down to 34%, it sort of works. And I say sort of because it's not aligned at the top here. That looks a little weird, but we'll talk about that in a second. So we've got width here 34%, width here 65%. So this adds up to 99. What's going on? What's going on with our layout? You know, it should work with one more percentage point. And visually, this is actually probably fine. You go, no, no, it's not. Not anymore. So it's fine here, but like if you go really thin, you're still going to get this issue where the width becomes too great and that lime colored div at the top pushes the other div down. Not what we want. So let's see why this is happening. And if you're looking at this UI, you might be able to sort of guess. Now let's go zoom in here. So looking at this, you'll see that there's some space here. Let's draw that out. There's some space. Not great at drawing at this angle. There's some space here in between the two divs. And so that's actually what's causing our issue. That's sort of the proximate cause. That's the cause we immediately see. Then the question though is where is this coming from? We haven't added any margins. We haven't added any padding. We haven't added any borders. What in the world is this space, this white space here? And I'm going to zoom out. And the answer is it is literally a space. This goes back to inline block. So we've got main and sidebar, and they're both displayed with inline block. If I said display block or commented it out, the exact same thing because they're divs, so they have display block by default, then things they just won't line up. Let's go ahead and, I'm going to go ahead and minimize that. So I can comment that, and this is the default for divs. 100% width, going to be as wide as they can be unless you tell them otherwise. And so I said, all right, well, that's not going to work, clearly, because we want them horizontally aligned. So let's make them inline block. Inline block. Okay, and so they line up nicely if they are slim enough, if they don't have too much width. And that's exactly what we're trying to get at here is we want them to essentially take up the entire width of the screen and be horizontally aligned. This isn't working because of this space. And like I said, I said literal space because inline block is saying, hey browser, I want you to take these things or this thing or whatever you're styling and kind of treat it like a word or some text. If you look down here at actual words and actual text, if you have a space, literal space here, it adds a space in the browser as well. And that's sort of what it's doing here. The thing is, it's a secret space. It's a space that you might not expect. The space is essentially here. It's this big old, I made it huge now, it's this chunk of white space. And now you might be thinking, well, there's no white space there. There actually is, though. There's this new line where my cursor goes from here to down there. That is a new line character. So if I take that away, hey, notice the difference. We'll zoom in to make it extremely obvious. I'm hitting, I can't see my code right now because I'm all zoomed in, but I'm hitting undo and undo and redo. So you can see that this space goes away if, having some zoom out trouble there, if we take the space away in our code itself. Now down here, there's no space. We now have brackets that are right next to each other. And so if we, now let's try it again, say 35, and hey, it works. Moreover, let's try this, yeah. So now we actually have what you'd expect if you say, hey, I want you to be 65%, I want you to be 35% width. They should just be that percentage of width no matter how slim or how wide the window is, which is exactly what we want. Cool. So that's the sort of really tricky bug I want to show you here. And it's partially tricky because it's just hard to look up. If you're like, well, why aren't if you're on Google searching for my things don't align, or why is my spacing off, it's just sort of hard to Google for. Hopefully going through this here helps you save a lot of time in the future. So let's bring that back. All right, bring it back for a second, actually. I want to show you real quick another property called vertical line. Vertical line top. So you'll notice that if we comment that out, you can see over there on the right what's happening. We've got these things that for whatever reason, it's aligned at the bottom by default. And that's not usually what you want. It's sort of not a UI that you're likely to need. And you can just use vertical line top to move it up to the top. But this is all sort of, this isn't a very often used property, because what you really should be doing if you want to horizontally align things like this is use flexbox. To quickly show what that would look like, we can say flex, display flex, and then down here we say, well, nothing. Actually, we can just make those display block again. And there's our half calls. Our parent div needs that flex. So yeah, there you go. This is how we can remove this. There you go. So now we can have our code formatted however we want, and our layout won't break, which is just great. That's much better. It's much less fragile, as you'll notice if we go. Let's just undo a bunch, inline block. We don't want that display flex. None of that. None of that. None of that. Okay, so here we are again, and you'll notice that, so there's no space here, but if I hit the auto format button, it's actually going to add that new line back in, and it breaks my layout. So this auto formatting can happen a lot, especially if you're working with other people. Who knows how other people want to write their code, and so they might see your code like this and say, you know what, that's not right, or that just looks really ugly. I'm gonna put a new line there, and then they break everything, and they won't know, because usually people aren't editing in an environment like we're in here, where you can see everything that's going on as it's happening. So just a warning there. Be wary when you're using display inline block for horizontal things. But we are going to use it for now, because I want to show you something else. Now that we've covered the main topic, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to bring back vertical align. Great. So now that we have this, we have our layout back. I just want to show you real quick another property that might come in useful. You might find interesting. So nice, we have our passing test there. If you look at our UI, the pairwise UI, and kind of take a look at it holistically, like we've got just the whole thing all together, and especially the height of everything. So you'll notice, well, you might notice down here we have this little arrow that's like, hey, there's more down here, there's more to scroll, and that's because we're using CSS unit to say, I want you to be 100% of the vertical height of the window. So there's more content down here, and it's, as soon as I start scrolling, it's sort of pixel perfectly aligned there, where the main UI just stops, the main workspace just stops right there at the bottom of the screen, and then this content starts. So what is that? Well, that is VH. dropping my stylus over here. VH. Yeah, that's not a great H, so let's just do it in code. Let's say main. I want to say main UB 100% of the vertical height. Height 100 VH. Hey, now it's pretty tall. But it still has a little bit of scroll. So this is sort of why I want to, by walking you guys through these things, we can just kind of introduce a few bugs. Or, I mean, they're not bugs in that CSS is doing what CSS is supposed to, but it might not be what you expect it to do. So you say 100 VH and then you get a little bit of scroll. What's going on? Well, that's happening because, go up here, we have this body tag, implicit body tag. We've mentioned in previous lessons that there's this body tag that's present even though you didn't put it in here, and it's sort of the parent of all the other tags that appear visually here. And it is getting some margins. You can see those margins over here as the, where's this? There's some margin, there's some margin. It's just this white space around. Zoom back out, zoom, zoom. All right. So there's this margin, and 100% or 100 VH is 100% of the vertical height, and it just takes it as sort of a number. What I mean is, let's say your window is 1,000 pixels tall, then 100 VH is going to essentially be equal to saying height 1,000 px. And using VH is great because if someone's on a phone, many different sizes of phones exist with different heights, or if someone's using a browser with a different height, then it'll still work for them. It'll still be the height that you expect. But it is exactly that number that represents 100% of the vertical height of the window. And right now we have a bit of margin here. So if we say body margin 0, now that you'll see that that's totally cleaned up. There's no more white space around any of this. And there's also no scroll. I can't scroll here. It's perfectly the exact height you want. All right, so I just want to show you that quick trick and show you why it might not work as you expect. One of the many issues that you run into when you're writing CSS is you want something to essentially be kind of just perfect. You want it to be exactly the height of something, exactly the width of something, exactly aligned somewhere. And you'll run into all sorts of issues that are sort of like what you just saw, where it's almost right, but it's not quite there. And so hopefully this helps you get through some of those hard times. And remember from earlier in this video that display inline block can be tricky because it is taking into account these spaces. It's taking into account white space that you may not actually know exists, and layout broken. All right, see you in the next video.